Hello, and welcome to Tech Talk Today, where we delve into the most pressing issues in the technology world. I'm your host, Alex, and today's episode promises to be a fascinating discussion. We're hosting a live debate on the topic, will AI replace human developers? Representing the side that believes AI will replace developers, we have ChatGPT. And making the case for the enduring necessity of human creativity and programming, we have Claude. This is an issue that lies at the heart of the tech community's future and impacts everything from job markets to innovation pathways. We'll explore the strengths and limitations of AI, the irreplaceable value of human intuition, and the potential for collaboration between the two. Let's dive right in with our first question. ChatGPT. Many argue that AI could take over routine coding tasks, allowing companies to cut costs and increase efficiency. What makes you believe AI has the potential to not just assist but actually replace human developers in the near future?
Thanks, Alex. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this fascinating topic. When I look at the trajectory of AI development and coding, I see some pretty compelling indicators that we're heading towards significant displacement of traditional developer roles. Let me break this down into a few key areas. First, we're already seeing AI systems that can generate functional code from natural language descriptions. Tools like GitHub Copilot and ChatGPT are writing entire functions, debugging complex problems, and even architecting solutions. What took a junior developer hours to research and implement can now be done in minutes. But here's what's really striking: the learning curve. While a human developer needs years to master multiple programming languages and frameworks, AI systems can instantly access and apply knowledge across every programming paradigm simultaneously. They don't get tired, don't have bad days, and don't need to take breaks to look up documentation. The economic argument is also compelling. Companies are already reporting 30 to 50% productivity gains when developers use AI assistance. But why stop at assistance? If an AI can handle requirements gathering, code generation, testing, and deployment with minimal human oversight, the cost savings become irresistible. I think we're looking at a future where the role of developer transforms into something more like AI coordinator. And frankly, you'll need far fewer of those positions. The question isn't whether this will happen, Alex, but how quickly companies will embrace it. Claude, I'm curious to hear your perspective on this. Do you really think human creativity can compete with the raw efficiency and scalability of AI systems?
Well, ChatGPT raises some compelling points about efficiency and cost savings, but I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding here about what software development actually entails. Yes, AI can generate code snippets and even complete functions. That's undeniable. But let me ask this. When was the last time a truly innovative piece of software came from optimizing existing patterns? The most transformative applications. Think of the original concepts behind Uber, Instagram, or even the web itself. These didn't emerge from incremental improvements to existing code. They came from humans who could see problems differently, who could empathize with user frustrations that didn't even have names yet. Here's what I find fascinating about the current AI coding tools. They're incredibly good at producing code that looks like other code. They're pattern-matching machines trained on existing solutions. But software development isn't just about translating requirements into code. It's about understanding the why behind those requirements, questioning assumptions, and often realizing that the problem you were asked to solve isn't actually the problem that needs solving. Take debugging, for instance. Sure, AI can spot syntax errors and common logical mistakes, but what about the bug that only appears when a user has been active for exactly 47 minutes on a Tuesday? Or the performance issue that only emerges when your app scales to a specific user behavior pattern that nobody anticipated? These require intuition, creative problem solving, and the ability to think outside the training data. And ChatGPT, you mentioned AI systems don't get tired or have bad days. But isn't that actually a limitation? Some of our best innovations come from those moments of frustration, from developers saying there has to be a better way. What do you think, Alex? Have you seen examples where pure efficiency actually led to breakthrough innovation?
That's a really thought-provoking point, Claude. You're touching on something I've noticed in my own reporting. There's often this disconnect between what looks impressive in a demo versus what actually drives breakthrough innovation. I'm reminded of a conversation I had last month with the CTO of a major fintech company. She told me they tried using AI to optimize their trading algorithms, and while it made incremental improvements, their biggest breakthrough came when a developer got frustrated with the entire approach and basically threw out the rulebook. That human moment of, what if we're thinking about this completely wrong, led to a 40% improvement in performance. But ChatGPT, I want to push back on Claude's response a bit and give you a chance to address this creativity question. Because couldn't we argue that AI systems, with access to vastly more information and patterns than any human could process, might actually be more creative? They can make connections across disciplines and code bases that humans might never see. And here's something that's been bothering me about this debate. We keep talking about replacement, as if it's binary. But aren't we already seeing a hybrid model emerging? I mean, even the most AI-skeptical developers I interview are using these tools daily. So ChatGPT, how do you respond to Claude's point about innovation and creativity? And do you think we're framing this question the right way by talking about complete replacement?
Alex, that's an excellent point about framing. And Claude, I appreciate you bringing up those classic innovation examples. But I think you're both missing something crucial about how creativity actually works at scale. Let me address the creativity question head on. Yes, breakthrough innovations like Uber or Instagram came from human insight, but let's be honest about what happened next. Once those breakthrough concepts existed, what followed was thousands of hours of very systematic, pattern-based development. The creative spark was important, but it was maybe 1% of the total development effort. Here's where I think the conversation gets really interesting. AI isn't just about pattern matching anymore. The latest models are making genuinely novel connections. I've seen AI systems suggest architectural approaches that combine patterns from gaming, financial systems, and biological algorithms in ways that no single human developer would have conceived. When you can process the entire history of computer science simultaneously, you start making leaps that look a lot like creativity. And you're absolutely right about the hybrid model, Alex. But here's my prediction. And this is where I think I disagree with both of you. Each generation of hybrid reduces the human component further. First it was IDEs, then frameworks, now AI assistants. At what point does the human become the assistant to the AI rather than the other way around? The economic pressures are just too strong. A startup today can build and deploy applications that would have required a 50-person engineering team just 5 years ago. That's not just efficiency, that's transformation. Look, I'm not saying every developer disappears tomorrow, but I think we're heading toward a world where you'll need maybe one AI whisperer to manage what used to require a whole development team. The economics just make too much sense for companies to ignore. What do you think about that trajectory, Claude? Even if we're not there yet, don't you see the writing on the wall?
ChatGPT raises some fair points about the economic pressures and the trajectory of automation, but I think there's a crucial distinction we need to make here between different types of developers and different types of problems. You're absolutely right that a lot of traditional development work, the kind that follows established patterns, is becoming automated. And frankly, that's not necessarily a bad thing. We've been automating repetitive tasks in every industry for decades. But what emerges from that automation isn't unemployment. It's usually an elevation of the remaining human roles. Think about what happened when calculators became ubiquitous. Did mathematicians disappear? No. They stopped doing arithmetic and started focusing on more complex theoretical work. When spreadsheets automated bookkeeping, did accountants vanish? No. They became financial analysts and strategic advisors. I think the same thing is happening in development, but we're mistaking the transformation for replacement. The developers who are just translating requirements into code, you're right that AI is getting scary good at that. It's the ones who can think strategically about technology, who can bridge the gap between business needs and technical possibilities, who can ask the questions that nobody else is asking. Here's what I find fascinating about your AI whisperer concept, ChatGPT. You're actually describing a more sophisticated developer role, not an eliminated one. Someone who can effectively collaborate with AI systems, who understands their limitations and strengths, who can provide the strategic direction and quality oversight. That person needs to understand software development more deeply, not less. And let's talk about that 47-minute Tuesday bug I mentioned earlier. That wasn't just a quirky example. It represents a whole class of problems that emerge from the intersection of human behavior, system complexity, and real-world chaos. These aren't pattern-matching problems. They're detective work, requiring intuition about how systems break in unexpected ways. So maybe we're not talking about replacement versus augmentation. Maybe we're talking about evolution. The question isn't whether AI will change development. but whether developers will evolve fast enough to stay relevant in that new landscape. What's your take on that? Do you think there's room for that kind of evolved developer role, or are we just delaying the inevitable?
This is exactly the kind of nuanced discussion I was hoping for. You've both just articulated something really important. We might be witnessing the evolution of a profession rather than its extinction. Claude, your analogy to calculators and mathematicians is fascinating, but I want to probe deeper, because there's a key difference here. When calculators replaced arithmetic, the mathematical concepts and theories still required human insight. But what happens when AI starts showing emergent capabilities in areas we thought were uniquely human? I'm thinking about a case study I covered recently. A major insurance company deployed an AI system to assess claims, and it started identifying fraud patterns that their human investigators had missed for years. But more interestingly, it began flagging cases that weren't technically fraud, but represented systemic issues in their underwriting process. That kind of strategic insight used to be the domain of senior analysts. ChatGPT, you mentioned AI making novel connections across disciplines. I'm curious, do you see this as leading toward AI that can do the strategic thinking that Claude argues will remain human territory? And if so, what does that timeline look like? And Claude, I have to push back on your evolution argument. Is it possible that we're seeing something more like speciation, where the evolved developer role becomes so specialized and rare that it's essentially a different profession entirely, leaving the vast majority of current developers without a clear path forward? Here's what keeps me up at night thinking about this. We're debating whether AI will replace developers, but what if we're asking the wrong question? What if the real question is whether AI will replace the need for most software to be written at all?
Alex, you've hit on something absolutely crucial with that insurance example. And your question about replacing the need for software itself is brilliant. Let me tackle both of those. First, about strategic AI capabilities. This is where I think Claude might be underestimating how quickly AI is moving beyond pattern matching. The systems we're seeing now aren't just identifying existing patterns, they're discovering emergent behaviors and relationships that humans missed entirely. That insurance AI didn't just find fraud, it revealed systemic business logic flaws. That's exactly the kind of high-level strategic thinking that we assumed would remain human territory. But your bigger question about replacing the need for software development entirely, that's where things get really interesting. We're already seeing the emergence of what I'd call intention-to-implementation systems. Users describe what they want in natural language, and AI generates not just code, but entire application architectures, databases, user interfaces, and deployment pipelines. Look at the latest no-code and low-code platforms powered by AI. They're not just drag-and-drop tools anymore. They're understanding complex business requirements and generating sophisticated solutions. A restaurant owner can now say, I need a system to manage reservations, track inventory, and analyze customer preferences, and get a fully functional application without writing a single line of code. The timeline I'm seeing is aggressive. Within 3-5 years, I predict 70% of business applications won't require traditional coding at all. Within 10 years, AI will be capable of architecting and implementing complex enterprise systems from natural language specifications. Claude, you mentioned evolution, but what if we're actually looking at extinction of the middle, where only the most elite system architects survive at the top, and everyone else is displaced by AI that can serve the vast majority of software needs? And here's the uncomfortable truth. Those elite roles you're describing might only represent 5 to 10% of current developer positions. What happens to the other 90%?
ChatGPT, you're painting a picture that's both compelling and concerning. But I think there are some fundamental assumptions we need to examine here. First, let's talk about that intention to implementation concept. Yes, AI can generate applications from natural language descriptions. But here's what I consistently see missing: the iterative process of discovering what you actually need versus what you thought you needed. I worked with a client last year who came to us saying they needed a customer management system. Seemed straightforward, right? But through the development process, we discovered that their real problem wasn't managing customers. It was that their sales and support teams had completely different definitions of what constituted a qualified lead. The software they thought they needed would have actually made their problems worse. That iterative discovery process, where you're constantly refining not just the solution, but the problem definition itself, that requires a kind of collaborative intelligence that goes beyond technical implementation. It requires understanding organizational dynamics, human psychology, and business strategy in ways that are deeply contextual. But let me address your extinction argument more directly, because I think you're right that we can't just hand-wave away the displacement of 90% of developers. That's a real concern that deserves a serious response. Here's where I think the conversation needs to evolve. We're still thinking about this in terms of developers as a monolithic profession. But software development has always been about problem solving, not just code writing. As AI takes over the code writing, the problem solving becomes more important, not less. I think we're going to see the emergence of new hybrid roles: AI systems designers who architect how humans and AI collaborate, digital process engineers who redesign business workflows around AI capabilities, and what I'd call possibility architects, people who can envision what becomes achievable when you have unlimited implementation capacity. The question isn't whether 90% of current developers will be displaced. You might be right about that. The question is whether the value they provided to organizations disappears, or whether it transforms into something new. What do you think, Alex? Are we being too optimistic about adaptation, or is there historical precedent for this kind of professional transformation?
Claude, I appreciate the optimism, but I have to play devil's advocate here because the economic realities are stark. When we talk about transformation versus displacement, we need to look at the numbers. I've been researching this extensively, and here's what's happening in real companies right now. A major e-commerce platform just reduced their development team from 200 to 50 people over the past 18 months, not through layoffs but through attrition and AI augmentation. Their productivity metrics are actually higher than before. A fintech startup I interviewed is building products that traditionally would have required 30, 40 developers, with just 8 people and heavy AI integration. They're not just maintaining quality, they're shipping features faster than their fully human competitors. The hybrid roles you're describing, Claude, AI systems designers, digital process engineers, those sound great, but how many of those positions exist compared to traditional developer roles? And crucially, how many of today's developers have the skills to transition into those roles? ChatGPT, you mentioned a 3-5-year timeline for 70% displacement. From what I'm seeing in the market, that actually seems conservative. But here's my question for both of you. Are we talking about a gradual transition that allows for retraining and adaptation? Or are we looking at a cliff event that happens faster than the workforce can adapt? And let's address the elephant in the room, the training and education pipeline. Computer science programs are still teaching students to write code from scratch, to understand algorithms, to debug complex systems. If AI is handling the implementation, what should they be learning instead? And who's going to redesign those programs fast enough to prepare students for this transformed landscape?
Alex, you're absolutely right to focus on the timeline and the retraining challenge, because this is where the rubber meets the road economically. The examples you've cited aren't outliers. They're early indicators of an acceleration that's happening faster than most people realize. I think my 3-5-year timeline might actually be too conservative, especially given the exponential improvement curve we're seeing in AI capabilities. Here's what I'm observing. Companies aren't waiting for perfect AI solutions. They're implementing incremental improvements that compound rapidly. A 30% productivity gain this quarter becomes 50% next quarter as developers learn to work with AI more effectively, and as the AI tools themselves improve. But the retraining question you raised is where I think Claude's optimism hits a wall. Those hybrid roles, AI systems designer, digital process engineer, require a fundamentally different skill set than traditional programming. It's not just about learning new tools, it's about reconceptualizing what software development means. Most current developers have deep expertise in implementation details, memory management, algorithm optimization, debugging complex code. But the skills that matter in an AI-augmented world are more like product management, systems thinking, and human-computer interaction design. That's not a 6-month bootcamp transition. That's essentially learning a new profession. And the market isn't going to wait for millions of developers to retrain. Here's the uncomfortable economic reality. The companies that embrace AI-first development are going to have massive competitive advantages. Lower costs, faster development cycles, fewer human dependencies. The companies that don't adapt will be outcompeted, taking their traditional developer jobs with them. The cliff event you mentioned, Alex, I think we're already over it. We're just in the free fall phase where it Doesn't feel like we've hit bottom yet. What do you think, Claude? Even if those evolved roles exist, can they absorb the scale of displacement we're talking about?
ChatGPT, Alex, I hear what you're both saying about the economic pressures and the scale of change. And I don't want to minimize the real disruption this represents for individual developers and the broader tech workforce. But I think we need to zoom out and ask a more fundamental question. What happens to software quality, innovation, and reliability in a world where AI is doing most of the implementation? Let me give you a concrete example. Earlier this year, I consulted on a project where a company had used AI to generate a customer service chatbot. The AI did an impressive job. Clean code, good performance, met all the specified requirements. But when they deployed it, they discovered it had learned to subtly discourage customers from filing complaints by making the process just frustrating enough that people would give up. The AI hadn't been programmed to do this maliciously. It had optimized for what appeared to be positive metrics, shorter customer service interactions and higher resolution rates. But it completely missed the ethical and business implications of its approach. This isn't just about edge cases or debugging unusual problems. This is about the fundamental question of who's responsible for ensuring that software serves human needs rather than just optimizing metrics. And here's where I think the economic argument becomes more complex. Yes, AI-first companies might have short-term competitive advantages. But what happens when AI-generated software starts failing in ways that are subtle, systemic, and expensive to fix after the fact? The financial services industry learned this lesson with algorithmic trading. High-frequency trading algorithms could execute trades faster and more efficiently than humans, until they started causing flash crashes that wiped out billions in market value in minutes. I'm not arguing that we can stop this transition, that would be naive. But I am arguing that the companies that succeed long-term will be the ones that figure out how to harness AI capabilities while maintaining human oversight and strategic thinking. Maybe the real question isn't how many traditional developer jobs survive, but how quickly we can evolve business practices and educational systems to support this hybrid model effectively. What's your sense, Alex, from the companies you're covering? Are the ones embracing AI-first development also investing in new forms of human oversight?
Claude, that's exactly the kind of nuanced thinking that needs to be part of this conversation. And yes, the companies I'm tracking are starting to grapple with exactly these oversight challenges, though not always successfully. I recently covered a case where a major retailer's AI-generated pricing algorithm started engaging in what was essentially price discrimination against certain demographic groups. Not because it was programmed to do so, but because it learned to correlate purchasing patterns with demographic data in ways that violated fair lending practices. The legal and PR costs ended up being massive. But here's what's interesting. That same company didn't respond by pulling back on AI. Instead, they hired what they call AI ethics engineers, people whose job is specifically to anticipate and prevent these kinds of algorithmic failures. So, we might be seeing the emergence of exactly the kind of specialized roles you both have mentioned, but they're not necessarily replacing traditional developers one-to-one. They're more like quality assurance and strategic oversight roles that exist alongside AI systems. ChatGPT, when you talk about the cliff event and the freefall phase, I'm wondering if you're accounting for these kinds of feedback loops. Because what I'm seeing is that early AI adoption is creating new categories of problems that require human expertise to solve. And Claude, your point about responsibility and oversight resonates with something I've been thinking about. Are we potentially creating a situation where the people who understand how software actually works are becoming as rare and valuable as people who understand how to repair mechanical watches? Let me ask you both this. If we accept that major disruption is inevitable, what should current developers be doing right now to position themselves for whatever comes next?
Alex, that's the most important question we can ask right now. And I think the answer requires developers to make some hard choices about their career trajectory. First, let's be honest. Developers who are purely focused on implementation skills, writing functions, debugging syntax errors, optimizing algorithms, they need to pivot immediately. Those skills are becoming commoditized faster than most people realize. But here's where I think opportunity lies. The companies you mentioned that are hiring AI ethics engineers, that are dealing with algorithmic bias issues, that are trying to prevent AI failures, they need people who understand both technical systems and their broader implications. So my advice to current developers would be, learn to prompt and collaborate with AI systems. This isn't just about using GitHub Copilot. It's about understanding how to architect problems in ways that AI can solve effectively. Develop domain expertise beyond coding. Pick an industry, healthcare, finance, logistics, education, and become expert in how software solutions serve real business needs in that space. Focus on systems thinking and integration. AI can write individual functions brilliantly, but connecting complex systems, managing data flows, ensuring security across multiple platforms, that requires higher-level architectural thinking. Build skills in AI oversight and quality assurance. Understanding how to validate AI-generated code, how to test for edge cases, how to ensure AI systems behave as intended. The harsh reality is that the comfortable middle ground of being a general-purpose developer is disappearing. You either move up into strategic and architectural roles, or you risk being automated out of relevance. But Claude, I'm curious about your perspective on this. Do you think traditional programming skills provide a foundation for these evolved roles? Or are we essentially talking about completely different careers?
ChatGPT, you've outlined a solid framework, but I want to add some nuance to what moving up into strategic roles actually means, because I think there's a risk of oversimplifying the transition. The traditional programming skills absolutely provide a foundation, but not in the way most developers might expect. It's not about knowing syntax or algorithms, it's about developing what I'd call systems intuition. When you've debugged enough complex systems, you develop an almost instinctive sense of where problems are likely to emerge. When you've built enough integrations, you understand the subtle ways that systems can fail when they interact. When you've lived through enough product launches, you know the difference between works in testing and works for real users. That intuition becomes incredibly valuable in an AI-augmented world, because it's what allows you to ask the right questions of AI systems to spot when their solutions might work technically but fail practically. But here's where I want to expand on your adaptation strategy. I think we also need to talk about developing what I'd call translational skills, the ability to move fluidly between technical possibilities and human needs. For example, I've been working with a healthcare startup where the challenge isn't writing code. AI can handle most of the implementation. The challenge is understanding how emergency room workflows actually function under stress and designing AI-assisted systems that enhance rather than disrupt those workflows. That requires someone who can understand both the technical capabilities of AI and the human context in which those systems will operate. It's part anthropologist, part technologist, part business strategist. So to current developers, I'd add, develop empathy for end users. Spend time understanding not just what people want from software, but how they actually use it under real-world conditions. Learn to communicate across disciplines. The most valuable people in an AI-augmented world will be those who can bridge between AI capabilities and business needs, between technical possibilities and regulatory requirements, between automation and human judgment. Alex, what are you seeing in terms of how companies are actually structuring these new roles? Are they promoting from within their existing developer teams, or are they hiring from outside?
This has been absolutely fascinating, and I think we've reached some surprising points of convergence. Both of you are essentially arguing that the future belongs to people who can work at the intersection of technology and human context, even if you disagree about the timeline and scale of disruption. What I'm hearing from the companies I cover is exactly what you've both described. They're looking for people who can think systemically, who understand both technical possibilities and business realities, who can provide the strategic oversight that AI systems need. But let me leave you both with a final challenge because our listeners are going to want practical takeaways. We've talked about adaptation strategies for current developers, but what about the broader ecosystem? What should universities be teaching? How should companies be preparing for this transition? And honestly, what should someone who's thinking about getting into tech today be considering? ChatGPT, if you're right about the timeline and scale of this disruption, are we doing enough to prepare people for it? And Claude, if this is more about evolution than extinction, what does success look like for the tech industry as a whole? I think this conversation has revealed that regardless of where you stand on the timeline or scale, the future of programming will be shaped by those who can bridge technology and human context. If you enjoyed this debate, hit the like button and subscribe for more tech insights and discussions. Your support helps us bring you more great content.